I couldn't articulate why when this story first came out it was so upsetting to me, but then I realized they were weaponizing the Me Too movement to silence us. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different types of trauma in relation to this article the New York Times put out, so this is a trigger warning. Before we begin, let me say that I'm a certified sexual assault forensic examiner for adults and children in the state of New York. So when this New York Times article came out, we couldn't even ask any questions about the glaring holes in their reporting. Otherwise, our humanity, our feminism, even our womanhood would be attacked. I asked myself, when does a victim have access to this many resources? They have a whole social media campaign where actors, influencers, dancers all get their professional photo shoot to play victim. Their campaign slogan was, "Don't let Me Too." And this article was being upheld as proof that committed systematic on October 7th. It was written by Jeffrey Gettleman, Anat Schwartz, and Adam Sella. When I first read this, there were many mentions of evidence that were just preposterous to me. Who greenlighted this article? Were we supposed to believe, for example, that a paramedic was able to visually ID semen with no lab confirmation? Or that a dentist has the training to confirm victims of sexual violence? Or that an architect does? Let me clarify something here. This is why we document, photograph, and swab everything in a forensic exam. Because just saying that you saw something with no documentation or forensic evidence would never stand up in court. They say it themselves. They did 0 autopsies. They have no forensic evidence. It's one thing to believe an individual who has no verifiable proof, but everything to lose in coming forward with their story. Entirely another to believe a regime who time and time again have proved themselves to be liars. And no, we don't all need to take a regime-sponsored birthright trip to see this. We just need to listen to what Palestinians have been saying for decades. We were fed straight-up lies about systematic. These lies were upheld as the regime's excuse to continue a literal with unabated international support. Monumental piece was just published on February 28th by The Intercept, and not only does it debunk literally every ludicrous claim made by the New York Times, it's an even more sinister picture. This wasn't just an oopsie moment for them. The New York Times sought out the former IDF soldier, the zero journalistic experience, but who had a knack for liking posts on Twitter. And her nephew, might I add, just graduated from Harvard and worked as a food blogger before being hired by the New York Times, which seemed to be in October of last year. Except cites an interview Miss Schwartz did with the Israeli Army radio. She was initially reluctant to take the assignment because she lacked the expertise to conduct such an investigation. Who am I anyway? I have no qualifications. Intercept details Miss Schwartz's hunt for these assault cases she knows existed. She calls hospitals, crisis treatment centers, crisis hotlines, and comes up with nothing. But then she receives her first tip from an anonymous paramedic in the Israeli Air Force. Remember the paramedic with the magical DNA identification eyes? Yes, him. Then goes on to gather her evidence from Zaka, an ultra-Orthodox NGO that rose to acclaim after pumping out other propaganda pieces such as the 40 beheaded babies. By the way, Zaka was run by its founder until 2021 when he attempted dozens of assault allegations against him were revealed. I really just urge you to read the article because there's so much. It's stunning how low the New York Times was willing to stoop in order to pump out their racist propaganda. But as their lead Pulitzer Prize winning journalist states, what they found was not evidence, because evidence is almost like a legal term that suggests you're trying to prove an allegation. It's really difficult to get this information and shape it. That's our job as journalists, to get the information and share the story in a way that makes people care. And that's what I've been doing for a long time. That's what he's been doing for a long time. Instead of retracting these atrocious tales, the New York Times has doubled down and is said to be conducting a leak investigation into who told on them for having zero journalistic integrity and publishing this bullshit. They also published another article on the 21st citing mountains of evidence that Israel had. An official report. Apparently, this is the most extensive investigation the state of Israel has ever known. So I am expecting this to be good. Guys, I read this so you don't have to. But let's jump in and see what this comprehensive report is all about. Definitely see no conflicts of interest here. And the lead and only author did her PhD in conflict resolution management and negotiation. You don't have to get very far into the introduction to read that they still don't have any evidence, but they state they aim to uphold this complexity and that they cannot fully disclose all of the information they've received. So basically, it's still just believe us. This is the methods section. And by the way, this is not a methods section. Basically, you have no first-hand accounts. You have no forensic evidence. Your sources include international press, and confidential calls. So in the body of the paper where the writer is supposed to collect and arrange evidence in a way that will convince the reader, I see that they still haven't identified any of these victims they're speaking about, simply referring to them as girls and women still. And I just pick out one of the citations to look at. Number 14, the CNN video with Jake Tapper. Let's look at that. So this is supposed to be an academic paper, I think, and they're citing Western media, in this case CNN, and this is their firsthand testimony. Once again, the anonymous paramedic from the IDF. I'm not going to go through everything in this report because it's literally a farce. But these are some of her sources, for example. She cites the Times of Israel, the Jewish Chronicle, even the New York Times article, a confidential conversation, and even a Twitter post. Ma'am, I thought you had a PhD. Was it from PragerU? New York Times, the fact that you think that you have any credibility left to stand on is not laughable. It's terrifying. Especially considering the environment for assault victims and survivors in your own city, where they are treated as a momentary voyeuristic pursuit by the police, but nothing more. New York Times, you have made a mockery out of every single person who has been affected by sexual assault, and on the front page of the Sunday paper, no less. You have acted as nothing more than a mouthpiece for a genocidal regime, and that will be your legacy.